Hey, it's John. Welcome back to the show, and welcome back to the latest edition of the Live Cut. The premise of this series is to talk about live albums that don't get enough love or recognition. Before my esteemed guest and I discuss the album today, let me introduce you to my esteemed guest. He was one of my first good friends that I met on YouTube. I met this man next to me on the Contrarians. He also had a YouTube channel at that time called Ryan's Vinyl Destination. This is Ryan Gavalier. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a
Yeah,
pleasure.
no, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Really excited to talk about this album. Really glad to be on here with you. So thank you.
You're very welcome, Ryan. And the album that Ryan and I are going to discuss today is an archival live release that was released on February 7, 2025. This is a band that I want to talk more and more about as I continue my channel here, John the Music Nut. This is War, live in Japan, 1974. These performances are from when War played in the cities of Shizuoka, Tokyo, Osaka, and Kobe, Japan in late 1974. The album they were promoting at that time was Delivered a Word, although we do have a few songs on here that would later come on their next studio album, Why Can't We Be Friends, in 1975. This was not the first War Live album. They released an album called War Live at arguably their commercial peak in 1973. We have a different track listing here because War Live was released on during the World as a Ghetto tour. This would be released on Delivered a Word. So we got a different track listing here. As I'd mentioned, we have a few songs from Why Can't We Be Friends as well. Now, the CD comes with a booklet that comes inside, and there's pictures of the original band. Well, the band after Eric Burden left and they struck out on their own. Right here, the members of War that played on this album, considered the classic lineup, are Charles Miller on saxophones, clarinet, and background vocals, Lee Oscar on harmonica and background vocals, Howard Scott on guitar, lead vocals, and background vocals, Lonnie Jordan on keyboards, lead vocals, and background vocals, B.B. Dickerson on bass guitar, lead vocals, and background vocals, Harold Brown on drums and background vocals, Papa D. Allen on percussion and background vocals. Charles Miller, B.B. Dickerson, and Papa D. Allen are no longer with us. War is still a touring unit. War, the name of the band, is owned by Jerry Goldstein through Far Out Productions. And Lonnie Jordan is the only original member of the band.
Mm.
The Lonnie Jordan version has been the one that you've been seeing for the last few decades. And there have been several talented musicians that have gone through the band. I've seen the Lonnie Jordan version 3 times. They kick. But this is magnificent. And we're going to go into that deeper as we go on. I've always been, the last several years, have been a big advocate of War and their live show. I think this is a band that over time, I think we're not hearing their music as much. We heard it a lot in the 90s because it was sampled a lot by a lot of rap acts. But I don't think we hear them enough anymore. Even though their music is exhilarating. A lot of hit
Mhm.
singles in the 1970s and their live show, as we're going to go into when we talk about this album, was fantastic. So, Ryan, what was your first experience with War's music?
Honest answer, the first time I ever heard War was on George Lopez as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I remember being probably like 4 or 5 years old, and like that show would come on, and I wouldn't even really watch the show, but I just remember hearing the song Lowrider on it, and I was like, that's a really good song. And then I don't know, a little bit later on, maybe when I was probably like 10 or 11, I discovered what the song actually was, started listening to that. Um, and I moved on from there.
Okay. So when I was 4, Why Can't We Be Friends came out. And I remember the singles for Lowrider and Why Can't We Be Friends when I was that young. That was some of my earliest remembrances of modern music at that time. And they got played to death. They were both top 10 hits here in the United States. Now, as far as owning a War release, the first one I bought was this greatest hits called The Best of War and More. This was a compilation that came out in 1987. I bought it in the early 90s. Why did I buy it? Because actually that was backwards. Well, the top and the bottom are the same, but yeah, that was upside down. But on Rock 107, WECX FM, Scranton, Pennsylvania, still locally owned and operated, they would play one War song in their deep rotation at the time, and that was Lowrider. Lowrider is their signature song. I had to have
Mhm.
Lowrider. I had to own this song. So I bought this CD. And this CD came out in 87. There was 2 new at that time songs. And it's best of. A lot of the songs here are in the single mixes because some of their songs could go quite long. They don't have Gypsy Man on here, which was interesting. I didn't hear Gypsy Man until many years after I bought this.
Mhm.
But when as time went on, I got more and more into their music. You'd hear their music in movies on occasion and HBO television shows. And I'd say maybe 10, 12 years ago, I got deep and I got into albums like All Day Music
Nice.
and The World is a Ghetto.
It's the best one.
Just to put that out there, the World is a Ghetto is also my favorite War album.
Yeah. No,
I think
absolutely.
that's a 10. That's a 10 record for me.
Yeah.
Deliver the Word that came out after that. This was a little mellower overall, but I still think it's a kick-ass record. And Why Can't We Be Friends, which would have the aforementioned Lowrider and the title track. And to me, this is their best era. I think those albums, which take up the set list on here on this album, I think this is top-notch War. War was an interesting band. They started out as a backing band. Well, they started out as a band. There was a band called Night Shift, and then other guys came in, and then later on, they were back in Eric Burdon for 2 albums, and then they went out on their own. And from the early to mid 70s till about maybe 77, War were a pretty big band here in the United States. One thing about War, as far as their sound, I like to say this about Little Feat too. They were a musical melting pot. Funk meets jazz, meets soul, meets R&B, a little bit of country in there, but more backwoods country, little bit, particularly Oscar's harmonica playing. So that's how I got deep into War's music. So this is a band I've seen live 3 times in the Lonnie Jordan version. What I can tell you is Lonnie really feeds off the crowd. If the crowd is into it, they're going to give you a dynamite show. I saw them play a 1 hour and 20-minute set. I saw them play an hour and a half. And the other time I saw them, which would have been the second time, there were only 200 people there in an 1,800 seat venue called Penn Speak and Jim Thorpe. And 200 people were there, and all 200 of us were into it. So Lonnie Jordan's feeding off the crowd, and they're just adding more and more songs. And they played over 2 hours that night, and it was magnificent.
Wow.
And they opened with City Country City from The World is a Ghetto. And so I was going ape shit because that's one of my favorite songs by War right there. And for the longest time, I only knew the single version, the abbreviated version on this Best of War. It was many years later before I'd hear the full version on World is a Ghetto. So I've rambled a little bit here. Let's talk about War's live in Japan, 1974. So, Ryan, what are some standout tracks for you on this release?
So I mean, I think that like pretty much everything on this album is kick ass. There's like a couple things that are a little bit of filler to me, but like standout tracks, obviously intro track World is a Ghetto is absolutely amazing. It's a bit longer than the studio version. I think it's what, like 4 minutes longer, something like that.
Yeah, about 5 minutes longer.
Yeah, and you definitely have some more jamming on it. Um, I absolutely love the track. I think that the only thing that I maybe like less than I like about the studio version is that the studio version really pronounces the bass lines a lot more than the live version did. And I think that that's actually like a very important part of the song for me because it's like fantastic bass lines. They're really heavy ones too. So I think that would be the only thing that maybe I like a little less about this version, but I think that the jamming throughout makes up for it. It's absolutely beautiful. The intro is so beautiful. Like, you feel like you're like listening to like Pink Floyd for a second at the beginning there. Um, Other tracks that I really love on the album, Cisco Kid. Once again, I think I like the studio version more of that one, but it's still fantastic on here. I think Lotus Blossom is really beautiful on here.
Yes.
I think that's just about as good as the studio version, honestly, if not a little bit better. Um, So is really fantastic on here. That's one of my favorite tracks by War, honestly. Um, I think the crowd reactions to that one are kind of funny because I hear people like laughing and stuff. For me, I'm just like, that's such a beautiful song, honestly. Um, I think Me and My Baby Brother, that's definitely an absolute classic. I do think that the version on here is better than the studio version for that. It's like heavier, it's a bit more aggressive, funkier. Although I love the studio version too. Where Is You At is fantastic on here. I also think that the version on here is probably a little bit better than the studio version. Um, yeah, I mean, I could basically list pretty much all the songs on here. I mean, All Day Music is beautiful on here. Don't Let No One Get You Down. I think that that's really, really fantastic on here. That version's absolutely beautiful. Um, I think. Did you want to talk about tracks that maybe are like filler now, or save that for later?
Uh, Um, no, let's just talk about the highlights first of all. Yes,
Okay.
that's fine. I I love everything on here. I and there's just certain things on these songs that I think really, really stand out, particularly in these extended versions. You were talking about The World is a Ghetto. You really have that heavy use of the clavinet in there,
Hmm.
and how back then the clavinet was such a predominant part of modern music, particularly funk and R&B. Then, for those of you who are not familiar with the clavinet instrument, listen to some of the Stevie Wonder big hits from that time. like Higher Ground, Superstition. You hear a lot of that in those songs. So you hear a lot of the clavinet on here. I think Charles Miller's sax playing on here is magnificent. And he was on the studio version. Charles Miller absolutely soars on here. And yes, everybody here really stands out. Lee Oscar's harmonica playing is tremendous throughout. If whether he's being playing as a lead or if he's just adding things in between the rhythm as an more as an accompaniment. I think he is wonderful. Everyone on here is wonderful. The thing is, you have these 7 musicians, all talented, but they sound so in sync as a unit. I don't know if I've ever heard a band that was this musical. I mean, there might be a few, but this is one of the standout bands as far as a band that has such high musicality, yet they're so tight. Their jams sound, everything is very, very cohesive. Like the jams are quite structured. As far as vocalists, I think this is some of the best harmony singing, not only on this album, but on the studio albums that I showed up. This is some of the best harmony singing I think you hear in popular music.
I agree.
Oh my gosh.
I agree.
Especially a song like All Day Music with that intro, how all those voices come in working off of each other until they're all singing together. The the choruses on that song are magnificent. They'll bring a tear to your eye. I mean, it just sounds so beautiful. A lot of the songs on here are going to be longer than what you had in the studio counterparts. Even the songs that weren't even released in the studio yet on the Why Can't We Be Friends album, such as Don't Let No One Get You Down and Lotus Blossom. They were going to be on studio versions of Why Can't We Be Friends later. They're longer here. They tighten them up for the studio, but they already sound fully formed. They don't really sound different than what you would get on that later studio album, which was a big hit for them. They were already fully formed. Some of the songs on here, they slow it down a little more. I think the version of World is a Ghetto starts out even slower than the original. But then
it definitely does.
Yeah. And then it picks up into that original pace. But then you have a song like Gypsy Man, which is already a wicked track on Deliver the Word. And here it is relentless. And it works. It is magnificent. There's this band, I mean, they were one of the most talented bands out there at that time. And you still hear a lot of this good interplay when you see the version that's out there now. Lonnie Jordan's leading, and Lonnie Jordan does a great job as leader of the band. When you go to see them now, he sang most of the lead vocals with War in the 70s, although you also had B.B. Dickerson singing a lot and Howard Scott singing a lot as well. And Charles Miller would actually be the one who would sing the Lowrider because he had that really deep bass voice.
Yeah.
Everything on here, I just think, is wicked. Now, I don't own War Live from 73. Have you ever heard War Live or no?
Yeah, I used to have it on vinyl back when I had a ton of records. It's been a while since I've heard it though, so I don't remember it too well, but I do remember enjoying it though.
War Live is very, very good. That is actually a very good live record. I give that an 8.5 or a 9. The production isn't quite as strong. I don't think the set list is quite as strong because you got a couple songs from the third self-titled album on there. I think those songs are good. I think everything they picked here was great. And I think the recording on this. This recording, what they did with the remaster, is wonderful. You can hear every instrument very, very clearly on here. I mean, for something that was recorded in 1974, this is an immaculate album sonically. Definitely got that vibe with this.
Yeah. No, I do agree. I think that even though there's like a couple things like I said with like the bass and like World is a Ghetto and things like that, I do think it is a very clean sounding album. Um I think that I think that there's like they were able to like keep the crowd noises and stuff and any background pretty clean too.
That's
There's
the
a couple times where you hear like little microphone noises or things like that, but it's like so minimal. Like it for the most part, it feels like it could be like they recorded live in a studio. Like not saying they did or anything, but like it sounds so clean that it feels like it could be that. But like it obviously was recorded live. It's just it was very, very well done in that regard. Um, and I think that the you were mentioning about the vocals. I think that that's something I definitely was very impressed with. I think that there's times where like the lead vocals, like whoever's singing from song to song, sound a little off from like the studio versions, but then the harmonies all come in and it's just like, wow, this is like absolutely insane. Such beautiful harmonies throughout.
and you would know a thing or two about that yourself as a recording musician who has released some albums through Bandcamp and has
Yeah.
and produced Rand Kelly's No Easy Access as well. So you would be a great source to go to when it comes to recording, since you've had a lot of experience doing this on your own.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you. I definitely like listen for a lot of those kind of things, and that's kind of why I was like comparing between the studio tracks and the live tracks, see like, you know, like what's better about the live songs, what's better about the studio songs. Um, and I think that for the most part, I think that the jamming is very successful because I think that like even a song like Gypsy Man, which I know you really like, I'm not really a huge fan of that song to be
Okay.
honest,
Okay.
but I do think on this version on here, the jamming that goes on throughout it elevates the song a lot from kind of like a mediocre war song to like
Okay.
pretty good, honestly. Um, and I think that even like southern part of Texas, I feel like that one's a lot jammier on here than it is in the studio. It's like the studio version's like 3 minutes long or something like that. They definitely take it to a much jammier territory. I was kind of saying like this just really feels kind of like a funky like Grateful Dead live album because of the way they like
That's an interesting point.
yeah, the way they like elongated a lot of these songs into like full on jams and stuff. Um, it's interesting though, actually, because I was reading an interview with some of the members of War, and I think it might have been Lonnie Jordan, if I'm not mistaken, but he said that he felt like they jammed more in the studio than they did live.
I can I I can hear that. That makes sense with them. That's how, and then they would jam, they would get onto something that will work really well. And then they would edit where they needed to. Some of the rhythms on here, you could tell they you could tell it was something that was they picked up on a harmonica riff or a groove laid down by BB and Harold and Papa D, and then they worked off it from there.
Mhm.
And then they turned into fully formed songs. especially
Definitely.
the songs that were more jammy. The ballads, I think, were a little different.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, me and my baby brother is like a total jam. They kind of just go off of that same riff the whole time. That dun, 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 dun. And same with like Southern Part of Texas. It's a very riff based song. Like they kind of go off the whole thing there. Um, Even Slipping into Darkness is kind of like jamming off that same riff for a lot of it, which amazing song there too. Forgot to mention that during my standout tracks, honestly, because that's a masterpiece of a song.
I think that song is aged like a fine wine in their catalog. Slipping in the Darkness. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That was a top 20 single back in the early 70s. And that funk is just so hard on there. It,
Beautiful harmonies on there too.
it is. The harmonies are fantastic. The interplay there musically and vocally is magnificent. But as far as like a hard funk, it doesn't get much better than Slipping in the Darkness. It is killer. So many different hooks on a song like that, and a lot of vocal hooks and musical hooks, I think, on a lot of these songs, particularly the ones that became big hits. Like Cisco Kid is hooks galore. There's so many different memorable parts of that song.
Definitely.
Like the harmonica playing, the lyrics, very, very memorable. And even the way they end each verse with the harmonies at the end, they all work as hooks. Slipping in the Darkness, it's just that killer groove, that bass line in particular. I think it works really, really well. And All Day Music has great hooks to it too, particularly vocally and lyrically. Yeah, this band, I mean, they had, for this 4 album stretch, I think they were on fire.
Mhm.
And they've had a long, pretty good sized catalog. They haven't recorded new music in the last few, not too much in the last few decades or so.
Yeah, I feel like they were a band that was like so of their time, yet it still sounds timeless.
Yes.
Like, I don't think that like I was kind of thinking about it. I feel like War is definitely like one of the most unique bands of all time. The way they fuse together like so many genres of like rock, funk, soul, country, Latin music, etc. And they just made it all so like flow together so cohesively too. And just like the massive amount of members they had in the band as well. Like, you know, it's really pretty stunning. And then like all the harmonies and stuff. I mean, I can't they were like a level above a lot of the funk bands of the time and stuff. I mean, I I think that they were just on to something completely different. It really was like a collective and like a unique vision. Um I would have trouble seeing someone trying to do something like that even after the 70s though. Like they were just like so of the 70s, but yeah.
You say that, and to me, please let me know how you feel about this statement. I think the 70s was the most exciting time in modern music because there was so much uniqueness
Mhm.
out there. Everybody was different. Everyone had a different, there were a lot of different genres that were sprouting up. Disco was getting huge for a little while. Punk came into big relevance. Progressive rock really, I mean, we had progressive rock in the 60s, but I think it really blossomed in the 70s. And there was room for all of it on the radio. Back then, everything wasn't so, we didn't put everything in a box. It wasn't so segregated. Everything got equal shift. It got And the record companies, and this is something I've said many times, the record companies work with the artists. If
Mhm.
they heard something, they'd work with them for a few albums. If, you know, United Artists could have gave up on War after they broke away from Eric Burden and they released their self-titled album and it only hit number 190. They could have said, oh, well, they're just a backing band for Eric Burden. We don't hear anything here. And they could have dropped them.
Yep.
And then they put out All Day Music and they had a wonderful hit in that title track. And they wound up having this fantastic run. And we had Something
Definitely.
in the Darkness on there too. But would you agree with me though? Like as far as like musically, it was a fantastic decade.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I think that for me, the 70s and 80s are my two favorite decades in music. And I think the thing that's really special about the 70s is that they were taking chances on people. Like the record labels were. And I feel like it didn't matter who you were, like if you had something going on, like some talent or something interesting about you, I feel like you were getting a chance. And so much like interesting stuff came out. And I feel like they also put trust in the artists too, like weren't having like other songwriters as much. Like, I mean, obviously, like pop music,
Excellent
maybe,
point.
but like with your rock musicians and stuff, there wasn't like having tons of like outside songwriters coming in and things like that. Probably not as like probably not as much micromanaging with like the record labels and stuff. So like you're just getting a lot more interesting stuff coming through the woodwork that like even in the 80s wasn't happening to that level. And I feel like not even in the 60s, like maybe like end of the 60s it was starting to happen, but
Right.
it was really the 70s where like full music anarchy kind of happened.
Full music anarchy. So what you're saying is a band like War or like a band like Steely Dan with the atmosphere that was out there, with the creativity that was out there, the freedom that was out there, their music, it was the best chance it was going to be heard by a lot of people would be the 70s.
Hmm.
And thank God for the 1970s, or maybe we wouldn't hear this great music if they came out with these songs in the 1980s. In the 80s, I think they were simplifying a lot of music. The synthesizer was getting more dominant in music, and it was a lot more about the video then. It
Hmm.
was more about, I mean, a lot of great music in the 80s. I think a lot of great music in the 80s was on the college radio stations. And it's aged really well. And now that some of that music is more popular than ever it was in the 80s. But a band like War, thank God they came into their own in the 70s. Because,
Definitely.
yeah, because to me, their music has aged so well.
Hmm.
Yes, it's been very influential for a lot of rappers and a lot of R&B that was to come, but they were just taking snippets out of there. The thing about War was they, as I mentioned before, within all that musicality, they knew how to simplify things. They knew how to get the hook to bring you in. The
Yeah.
70s. Yeah, but I mean, think about 1974. I mean, at a time you can hear the Carpenters, Bad Company, and Steely Dan and War one after the other on a radio station. You didn't blink an eye. As our friend Rand Kelly once said, back then we just called it all rock,
Hmm.
or we just called it music. Just a better time. Times that I wish
Definitely.
I was 10 years older so I could have saw a lot more of these bands. And maybe, or I would have saw the 7-piece classic lineup of War, although the War that's out there now is very, very good. We were talking off screen about other eras of the band, and I got the albums here because one thing about Rhino, what they've done very well is they've done some great archival projects. And a lot of people are who were into this music back in the 70s are buying these albums again because we got these pristine remasters and re-recordings of these albums. But they also put out Eric Burden and War, the complete CD collection. Now on here, we have the first two albums that contain War as a musical entity, and Eric Burden declares War and the Black Man's Burden. And then Love Is All Around, which I believe was released in 1976. And I believe United Artists put this out. By this point, I think they had broken from United Artists. The last studio album was Why Can't We Be Friends? And United Artists put this out here to try to cash off the War name. This was a different era musically. Like, a lot of the remnants of what you would hear on these classic albums like All Day Music and The World Is a Ghetto are here. But it's a different structure here. So, Ryan, you and I were talking about that. Why don't you go further into how you feel about the Eric Burden version of the band?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that Eric Burden era, I've listened to those albums. Um, I'm not quite as familiar with them. I think that from what I've gathered, Spill the Wine is probably the song that sounds the most like what you would get from like Future War. But I mean like Tobacco Road was a really cool jam track. It's not really like as much of what you see like in the future, but it's a really good jam track, and I feel like that fit Eric really well. Um, I I feel like from what I remember though, a lot of the tracks that I remember were just kind of like mid. Like I remember like that cover of Nights of White Satin that they did.
Yeah, two
Um,
versions of it.
yeah, that's like one of the ones that I remember. And I just feel like it's okay, but like I feel like it just kind of shows that Eric's like Eric only fit in with the guys in War to like a limited level. I feel like I feel like he coming from the animals and stuff needed a little bit more like structure and stuff. I just feel like he didn't particularly like fit to like jamming quite as much and things like that. And I feel like also at that point of time, I know he was kind of going through some rough stuff, and like you can kind of hear it in his voice at times. Like on that cover of Nights in White Satin, like that's kind of a rough vocal performance, honestly. Whereas like Spill the Wine sounds awesome. And it's not like a very like jammy track. It's kind of more like a structured like Latin rock type of song.
Right.
And I feel like he really thrives there. Um, it's been years since I've listened to those Eric Burden albums, so I'm like having trouble remembering a lot of the song names, honestly. But that's just kind of the vibe I got. Like some good stuff on there, but a lot of stuff was kind of mediocre.
That's kind of how I feel because I didn't really know these albums until I picked up this collection. And this has the albums Eric Burden Declares War. And by the way, sound wise, sonically, masterful. Just like this Live in Japan 74 we're talking about. The Black Man's Burden, this is a 2 CD set. And then Love Is All Around, which is an interesting album cover. It's basically a
Mhm.
news, it's designed like a front of a newspaper. Interesting albums. There are songs on here. There are moments on here I really like, but it's more War providing this musical foundation for whatever Eric was thinking about improvising about. He's mostly just singing. A lot of it's just beat poetry over over this wonderful musical soundscape, but not quite as
Mhm.
structured as we'd get with War on Their Own. Interesting albums. not ones. I haven't gone back to these albums too much yet. I will dig deeper into them, but they don't grab you the way that the albums, the classic albums that we're talking about today.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the like War, like the lineup that came right after that, there's just so much chemistry.
Yes,
And I feel like that was what was missing during the Eric Burden era. I just feel like he kind of stuck out like a sore thumb at times.
I think chemistry is a perfect word there. They
Yeah.
had this chemistry among themselves, but with Eric Burden, and respect to Eric Burden for what
Oh
he's.
yeah,
He's one of the great voices in rock, one of the most
definitely.
distinguished, what one of the most recognizable voices in rock music there, particularly in the 60s and early 70s. But yeah, it. He did kind of stick out like a sore thumb at times. Although do like some, I think "Spill the Wine" is magnificent, and it
Oh
was their
yeah.
first big hit. I think it may still be their biggest chart hit. "Spill the Wine," I believe that hit number 3. It's funny. Or earlier on, and maybe you've seen this too. Back in the 80s, 1980s on MTV, they'd show these old video clips of performances and they call them closet classics. And that's when I first discovered "Spill the Wine."
Oh wow.
Yeah. And they used to play that pretty frequently. Like they play Bruce Springsteen and E Street Band's "Rosalita," for example. They'd play Black Sabbath doing "Iron Man," but it would just be them on stage and they'd have this psychedelic lighting and stuff and this weird camera work going on. I mean, it making it even more psychedelic than it was. But that was when I first heard "Spill the Wine." They still do "Spill the Wine" live. It still goes over like gangbusters.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that
kind
was. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say I kind of wish they did it on this album, honestly.
Yeah,
I think that
it
would have been
certainly
really
work.
cool.
It would certainly work. I mean, they had the talented vocalist to do it. Lonnie could have done it. Lonnie sings it live now.
Yeah.
It certainly would have went over well. Later on, after they left United Artists, like a lot of bands that were funky in the 70s and had a really signature sound, they went into different directions. And this is a collection I also bought from Rhino, the CD collection 1977 1994. They started going more disco. And I think you heard that a lot with some of these hard funk bands. Like Kool and the Gang went through it, and then eventually they went more pop.
Hmm.
Earth, Wind, and Fire were a harder funk band before they crossed over. Although I think with Earth, Wind, and Fire, I think their songwriting really blossomed in the mid to late 70s. And I think that really helped them a lot.
Definitely.
War, they, I think they caught fire for those 4 albums that we're talking about and what the performances are from here. And after that, I mean, they had good songs, but I don't know if they ever put it together through an album. Like I think "Galaxy" is a fantastic disco jam.
Mhm.
The "Galaxy" is awesome. And "Summer" was their last biggest hit. That was in 77. That that's a very, very cool tune. Very breezy summer-like tune, but the horn lines on there are wonderful. But yes, and then when band members started leaving, Charles Miller left, and a year later he was shot to death. Papa D. Allen in the late 80s, he died on stage during a war performance, I believe.
Oh
So
wow.
they had this they had this synergy when you had these 7 guys there. And it was magic. And I think it's an era of music as a band it should be discovered more. They had several top 10 hits, top 20 hits, songs that you've heard snippets of in rap, and you've heard them in TV shows and um, TV series, movies. So This is War live in Japan 1974. So Ryan, based on listening to this album, how would you rank this on a scale of 1 to 10?
Um, I would give it probably like an 8.5 out of 10.
Okay.
I think that like all the main tracks are fire. There's like that chant track that is filler. I mean, it's fun to hear the crowd and stuff, but it's kind of like filler. And then um the intro to Slipping in the Darkness, I could take it or leave it, honestly. Um, but I think that it's a really well recorded album. I think all the performances are great, and I think a lot of the jamming adds to songs that were already awesome. See, I would say like an 8.5 out of 10. I think it's a really solid release.
I love this. And I'm going to go into some of the other reasons I love it after I give my ranking. I give this a 10. I think this is a glorious live album. Wonderful reissue here. Thank you, Rhino Records, for putting this out. Thank you, War, for giving us this wonderful music. There are a few things on that you reminded me of about this album. The chant from Shizuka, which was what you were alluding to before, that was their way of asking for an encore because English isn't their first language there in Japan. That was their way of asking them to come back out. So they
Mm.
started that chant, and then the band came back on stage and start playing to the chant. For those of you out there who are big fans of music from the 1960s, if you hear this chant, and if you're familiar with the Woodstock Festival in 1969, as well as the Woodstock soundtrack and Woodstock movie, this is the same chant. Well, they're chanting the same thing that they did during the Woodstock movie before they play Santana's Soul Sacrifice. So when I first heard this, I'm like, oh yes, I'm very familiar with this. And then and you hear Lonnie playing the keyboard to what they're chanting, and then you hear the drums start kicking in, and then they go into Where Was You At? Another thing that I'd like to talk about, and this I found out by reading the liner notes in the album. There is an interview in here with Jerry Goldstein and Lonnie Jordan, who, by the way, they produced this album along with Jeremy Levine for Avenue Records, Far Out Productions. Far Out Productions owned the name to War. That's Jerry Goldstein's company. The performances and the band's experiences on this album would be lead to the song Why Can't We Be Friends? They had performed, this was their first time performing in Japan. And when they traveled all together, all seven of them as a unit. And when the people in Japan seen them on the streets, they wouldn't know how to react to them, almost like they were weary of them, perhaps afraid. So, and they were taken back by it because they weren't used to that. I mean, they were all from LA, Los Angeles, California. They all came from different backgrounds, different cultures. That's what they brought into the music. That's why this music on this album and this era really, really worked and shines like a diamond to this day. So they went back to the hotel or maybe to the venue they were playing at, and they were going, well, why can't we all just be friends? And right after that, Lonnie came up with the keyboard line in the chorus.
Wow.
So that wasn't so. Although there's a few songs on here that were later come on, Why Can't We Be Friends? That song hadn't been written until after they played these shows. So that their experiences, what they were going through there, was a segue into one of their biggest hit singles.
That's wild.
Yeah, it is wild. I read that. I was like, wow, they're really, really cool.
Do you know if Lowrider was written by that point?
In what I seen in here, based on what I see, I'm going to say no.
That's interesting because I know on the album, like during the performance. I think it's when they were talking about, it might have been about So, or it might have been, I don't remember which song, but they're like, this is a track that's gonna be on our new album coming out on January 1st, 1975. So like they must, if that's really interesting about Why Can't We Be Friends. I wonder if they had a different name for the album than before
Perhaps.
that track came out.
And it's interesting. You get one thing that makes sense with that story is that's the last song on the album. And though as though
Yeah,
they did that right at the end. And Lowrider's one of the last songs on the album too. Maybe it was one that they had in their pocket already. They just hadn't performed it live.
yeah,
I'm gonna venture towards no, but I could be wrong. Because I
yeah,
a song with a hook like that, maybe you'd want to do that live in Japan, but
yeah,
maybe they were still working on it, you know. So
yeah. It's interesting, honestly. Because do you know, did it say in that booklet what date the concert was?
they didn't go over the dates; they only went over the cities. And when you go on Setlist FM, you only see one date, and it is near the winter of 74 that we're going to 75. There was very little on Setlist FM. I rely on Setlist FM a lot when I talk about these live albums, but
Yeah.
it listed a date and a city. It didn't list what they played.
Okay.
So
Yeah. So that's interesting because it seems like, yeah, they knew they already had an album that was like being ready to be released. So yeah, maybe they were like, all right, we need a couple singles and then Lowrider, and obviously you told the story about Why Can't We Be Friends, threw those on like last minute or something like that.
and maybe they were even getting pressure. I mean, Deliver the Word was still a pretty big album for them.
Yeah.
Gypsy Man was such a huge hit, and Me and Baby Brother.
Hmm.
I think there may have been a pressure. Okay, we got to keep the momentum going. We got 3 gold albums in a row now. We didn't have platinum record albums at that point. We need a hit. And maybe those were the ones that they wrote. Maybe Lowrider first. Interesting.
Yeah.
Another one
Yeah.
more thing I forgot to mention about this album. We have the version of Me and Baby Brother, but you actually have the Baby Brother version that was originally a live track on All Day Music, and then the Me and Baby Brother that was released later as a hard funk single. And they start out with the hard funk single, which is very, very rhythmic and has a
Mhm.
very strong feel with the polyrhythms and all that. It's very percussive. And then it goes into Me and Baby Brother, which is more like a blues jam. I like how they segued those into each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, because well, what I would when I'm seeing them live and other times I've heard their live music, they would do either one or the other. And Me and Baby Brother, they would once it became a hit single, that's what they would go into. But Baby Brother's just this kind of driving R&B song. But Me and Baby Brother, which came later, had that dun 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 dun, dun rhythm on it.
Yeah. Me and Baby Brother, I feel like that's like one of their like purest funk songs.
Yes.
Kind of gives me like Sly and the Family Stone type of
Yes.
vibes.
I agree
It's
with that.
really interesting because like especially on that set list, like I feel like that song sounds very different than the rest of the tracks because it is like such a pure funk track.
No doubt about that. But I dig everything on here.
Oh yeah,
I like
definitely.
I like the extended versions of the songs that would later come out on Why Can't We Be Friends? The version of Cisco Kid, I think, kicks ass. I love the extended version of The World is a Ghetto. I think Gypsy Man takes on a life of its own. Lotus Blossom and So are wonderful vocals. BB
Hmm.
Dickerson's lead vocal on So is fantastic.
Yeah.
I actually like the harmonica solo too, into Lee Oscar's harmonica solo into Slipping in the Darkness. I think it's very well done. I sometimes I'm not a fan of long solos on a instrument like a flute or harmonica, but here I think it really really works. I think Slipping in the Darkness is killer. Where
Hmm.
Was You At's hard hitting. I love how they seamlessly put the two versions of Baby Brother together. So this is an album I would give a 10 to. This is a fantastic archival live release. This is War, live in Japan, 1974. Thank you all so much for watching today. What do you think of War's music? What do you think of this album? Have you heard this album? It just came out February 7th, 2025. Did you see War back in the day? Have you seen War more recently? Do you know War more for their hit singles? And they had several hit singles in the 70s. Or do you know, are you really deep into these albums that Ryan and I have talked about today? What are your favorite songs by War, your favorite albums? Is your favorite album The World is a Ghetto like Ryan's is and mine is? Please let us know in the comments what you think of War's music and this wonderful archival live album, live in Japan, 1974. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been way too long. And for saying, John, why don't you pick the live album today? Because you said that, and I know you well enough. We've hung out, and we live 5 hours apart, but I've gone to where Ryan lives. We've hung out a few times, and we broke bread together, talked a lot of music, and I know Ryan's musical tastes are very, very eclectic. I'm glad you said you choose the album, because you said that. I'm like, how about this one? And you went out with blink of an eye. You're like, sure, I'll do that one. So
Hmm.
thank you so much for joining me today, Ryan.
Thank
Been
you.
a fantastic discussion.
Absolutely.
What do you have going on musically these days? I know you haven't been out on YouTube. Ryan had a channel called Ryan's Final Destination, where you've seen me and Grant Arthur and a few other people on the Contrarians lending their expertise. What do you have going on musically? What do you have going on artistically?
Um, I've done a little bit of recording the last few months, but honestly, like recently I've just been kind of just playing guitar for fun at the moment. I haven't had like a ton in mind for like recording. I've kind of been getting ready to get married in a couple months and, just like just some like life things right now, like working on some stuff at the moment. So haven't been doing a ton, but I definitely want to like do more on YouTube, and I've been like been starting to do more on the guitar again. So who knows? I have a little bit of a backlog of stuff I recorded that I could release at any point too. I just am not ready to quite yet. So to be continued with that.
Very, very good. Are you thinking about opening your YouTube channel back for music discussion, or you're thinking about more about your original music?
Um, we'll see. I'm not really sure at the moment.
Okay.
It's still a work in progress of what I want to do with that, to be honest, but we'll see.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to what you have lined up, and congratulations on your upcoming marriage. I'm very, very happy for you. And I know a lot of
Thank
us,
you.
you're welcome. I know a lot of us that have done shows with you are still out here on YouTube. We all talk and think of you highly.
And
And
thank you.
you're very welcome. And you have an open invitation to come back. No doubt about it.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that. I would love to.
I got some things in mind, Ryan. I got a new series I have starting in January. Right after I press the stop button, I'll talk to you about. I'll run some things by you.
Okay.
Thank you all so much for watching the show today. This show is going to come out on Saturday, January 3, 2026, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. So happy belated New Year to all of you watching today.
Happy New Year, guys.
You got it. Do what you love, and we'll talk to you soon.